In my previous video on this subject, called Looking at Wah Pedal Inductors with a Curve Tracer, I looked at the various Lissajous patterns created on an oscilloscope in XY mode. While interesting, it doesn't tell us too much about the frequency response of these small value inductors because that type of curve tracer operates at a fixed frequency of 60 Hertz. When I discovered that there is a signal generator based curve tracer that one can build, I thought I could learn much more about the frequency response of these small value inductors because I could vary the frequency of the signal going into them, and so I had to make one for myself. In this video, I will go over the circuit I used, my implementation of it, and then do a quick demonstration of the frequency response of a red phasal and a yellow phasal inductor. So here's the schematic. As you can see, it's quite simple. All you need is a signal generator that can produce a sine wave that you can vary the frequency of. And comes out, goes to your Y input on your oscilloscope. This down here is your X input to the oscilloscope. You connect the banana jacks to these 2 points. And these are your probes. And I have these 2 5K pots wired as variable resistors to ground so I can control the signal levels going into each input, because I found it's needed for this to work with all 3 of my analog oscilloscopes. Now, I got this schematic off of a video on YouTube that is very similar to this, but it doesn't employ these potentiometers. But his was based specifically on one type of oscilloscope, and mine needs to be a little more versatile, so that's why I came up with this arrangement. So now we'll show you my implementation of this into a real-world little box that you can use. So here it is. As you can see, it's very compact. It's built into an old Radio Shack plastic project enclosure that measures 3 inches by 2 inches by 1 inch. So basically, your signal from the function generator or whatever you're using that produces a sine wave comes in here. I have the banana jack for the probes or any various kind of adapters that you could use. Here's the outputs of the oscilloscope. X goes to the horizontal, Y goes to the vertical. I've got a couple of 5K pots here to make adjustments so that I can use it with any of my 3 analog oscilloscopes, because they all behave a little differently with this setup. And then here's the inside. As you can see, it's very simple. It's just a few wires, and because it's a plastic enclosure, you have to figure out a way to make all of your grounds connect, but I managed to do that with some things I just had laying around. So next I will show you these little Wah Pedal Inductor frequency responses using this thing, and you'll see why it's a much more versatile way of kind of getting an idea of the frequency response of these things. This is the yellow phaser hooked up to the curve tracer. I'm currently feeding it an 82 Hertz signal, which is the same frequency as the top E string, open E string on a guitar. And I will turn on some sound so we can actually hear this. So that's 82 Hertz. I'm turning it up to 110 Hertz, which is an open A string. And then open D, 147 Hertz. Or around there. For all you pitch perfect people, you're going to know I'm not exactly dead on here. 196 Hertz, which is basically an open G. And then open B at 247 Hertz. And the bottom E at 330 Hertz. Now I'm going to take it up all the way to 1 kilohertz. So you can see at 1 kilohertz it starts to look more like a capacitor basically. And the interesting thing I noticed is that if you take out an XY mode, the amplitude of the signal will basically be the same as your high points on this curve. Right, so there's that. And then if we go lower in frequency, the amplitude goes up, which matches the from here to here. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's hard to do this on every scope because the way things are set up, you have to switch between X, Y, and go down to a low enough time division setting. And with this particular scope, this old Heathkit IO4560, it's real simple. There's just like basically one knob that does everything when it comes to time division, but that's defeated when we're in XY mode. So anyways, we'll go back down to 82 Hertz and then we'll test our red phasal. So switching over to red phasal, doesn't look much different. So there's basically around 110 Hertz. And then we'll go up to 147. 196. Now 247, which is like an open B string. And then the bottom E, 330 Hertz. And then we'll take it all the way to 1 kilohertz. So you can see the yellow and the red phasal don't really look all that different, do they? Now the interesting thing I also noticed is it seems that you can get in the ballpark resonant frequency range by using this curve tracer as well. We can take this out of the hertz range here, go into kilohertz, and if we go to the 10K range, you can see that about at 4.6 hertz it's starting to collapse, and the point where it totally collapses seems to be where the impedance is the absolute highest, which would be its resonant peak, which in this case would be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 22 to 23 kilohertz. Now I'm still testing this out, but it appears to me that you can get a pretty close approximation of the resonant frequency by using this thing as well, which was kind of an added bonus that I didn't know I had when I made this thing. So one interesting characteristic of the red phasal that the yellow phasal does not have is on this oscilloscope here, I get this interesting kind of bow tie shape when I have about a 28 hertz signal going into it. As it goes up in frequency, it changes shape until we get to the point where we're at a low E, fat E string, it looks like that, and then as we go up, it starts to flatten out. Now it looks a lot like a capacitor at this point, at about 500 hertz. So there is something interesting going on with the red phasal. What exactly I'm looking at here, I'm not sure. Maybe it's the way the core is saturating or something, but I thought it was kind of interesting. So it turns out that this kind of bow tie shape is actually due to an asymmetrical waveform. If we take this out of XY mode you can see that the waveform is asymmetrical. I'm having a little trouble getting this camera to sync with the scope, but that's what's going on. And then if you increase the frequency, you can see the asymmetry is still there, but it's just not as drastic. Interesting, there is something going on with this red phasal. It's a little bit different than seems like these other inductors.